Okay, I'm going to explain very simply, in most simplistic terms, why there's an affordability issue and a political issue in North America, whether it be Canada, US, Europe, and this is a reason why, and Europe I'm including UK as well. So it's about belief systems, created belief systems, and let's go to the main screen. So creative belief systems. Number one, here we have a professor on the left. This video, 18 hours, 27,000 views. Here we have on the right, video I did 4 months ago, got 11 views. Now here's the other factor I want to explain. You take the Catty K, Scaramucci, or Scaramucci, politics, political US. And also you take the UK version with Alistair and Rory. So whatever happens usually is contrarian viewpoints are debunked unless it's a professor. Now, the reality is that we've followed a system for many, many decades. It's based on a neoclassical economic system, and it really goes back to 1791, and not many people have actually pushed back against it with a contrarian viewpoint, except for Mr. Keene here and a few others in the past, not in the way that Steve Keene, he's Australian. And there's also Richard J. Murphy in the UK that's got a good understanding of the system needs to be changed. The framework of the system is broken. It does not work. And I'll give you another example. You had a situation where Donald J. Trump passed a big, beautiful bill. Well, the big, beautiful bill was not like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, giving to the poor. It was the exact opposite. Stealing from the less fortunate to further enrich the rich. And this has been an issue, and this is why you have an affordability issue. This is why you have a political issue, because people are just too easily manipulated. We've had a Darwinian ideology way of thinking, where the evolution of man, animal man, survival of the fittest, might is right, and for some reason, the human race and the human being has forgot the human being's not an animal. Why do we get caught up in a construct and further propagate that construct within our realities to the detriment of our society, our civilization, and the people that exist around the world? You got 8 billion people. There's no perfect way to do anything, but there is a very simple correlation to make here is, you want pain and suffering, or do you want harmony and abundance? Pain and suffering, harmony and abundance. And people will say, well, that's a utopian way of thinking. Yes, so what? What belief systems have you bought into to push back against that? What belief systems have you created you hold on to push back against that? The Economist, doesn't matter if he's got a Nobel Peace Prize, nobody pushed back and actually says, well, that theory, prove it to me. How does that work? So you've had a theory for a long time, supply and demand and equilibrium, and they're based on constants. Well, life is dynamic. The seasons are dynamic. Nature of the universe is dynamic. So we create these constructs that no longer serve us. It takes us a while to figure it out, but most people don't figure it out because they invest too much time in, could be education. But the education may be flawed. Nobody questions that. This is the way it's going to be. We teach you how to think. Do they teach you how to think? No. They teach you what to think. And you take what you think into the real world, and then if something pushes back against that belief. You push back and you can't give up because your ego mind says, I've invested. You've created this avatar that's invested in a lot of money and time, creating an education, creating a position within society. People look up to you and it makes you feel good. And whether or not the pushback that's coming back to make you actually question that, you can't give it up because your natural subconscious and unconscious mind has to hold its position. Survival of the fittest. And this is where we got a problem. And until you understand that, and this is why you are now you got educated people in their early 20s, even younger, even older, that buy into what's happened in the past. What's happened in the past has created the mess of the present. You live in the present, so you need to change the present to serve the people, not go back in time and keep applying what didn't work, what created the situation you're in the present. So it needs to be changed. Perfect example is, I did this video, how America cheated the world with Bretton Woods. I went a little more in depth than that too. But yet here on the left, US dollars collapse and Trump's financial fallout. So listen to Steve Keen here.
Mr. President, with the current value of the dollar, do you think it's declined too much?
No, I think it's great.
Donald Trump believes that a weaker U.S. currency would favor the development of U.S. manufacturing sector.
Tariff policy has created risk about the status of trade with the USA.
The dollar's got enough reasons to decline on its own.
Confidence in the dollar and U.S. stability is beginning to crack. And if it breaks, you are going to be the one that pays for it first.
And rather than reacting to the horrors of World War II, we're now reacting to the horrors of a world in which the whims of Donald Trump determine what happens and what doesn't happen.
Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition.
We can't trust America not to elect somebody like Donald Trump again in the future. I normally avoid watching the World Economic Forum like the plague because I just expect platitudes, boring speeches and nonsense to come out of everybody. But I was quite surprised by the speech by Mark Carney, where he actually laid down the truth about the situation we find ourselves in globally and how we got there. Let's have a quick listen to Mark Carney here.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically, international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful. Open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
And that's a huge admission. He's quite right. There's no way that the current system can continue for a whole host of reasons. But one of the obvious ones is you certainly can't trust Donald Trump, but can you trust America? America's thrown up this creature. America has broken the rules of a system that it imposed in the first place. So you can't rely upon the Americans anymore.
But the problem with the Americans is there's no continuity of thought, of process. And we've seen how it really got disrupted under this Trump 1 and now Trump 2. Now, you think, well, you got two sides of the coin. Some people love it, some people don't. But the people that love it are the right and fight to might. Might to right, fight to right, might. The guy with the biggest club wins. And it doesn't even have to be that way. But you just keep taking the past, keep trying to apply it to the present, and it's not going to work. Nobody is coming up with something different. Like, you don't even understand how money is created. Like the gold standard, which came into being by Germany in 1871, which I pointed out here, and Britain in 1821. Even a decade and a half ago, I had a couple of friends. One was a multimillionaire, the other guy was a billionaire. And the multimillionaire, mind you, he through alcoholism was totally ruined everything. But he was the best thing he looked up to, the most cherished, prized asset that he had was a British passport, because Rule Britannica. And this is how you got the conservative movement and the IDU.org, independentdemocracy.org, which has Republicans in the States. Stephen Harper's the chairman for it. A huge organization. It's got its tentacles reach around the world. But you had a situation, and this is where it just keeps repeating itself, rinse and repeat, in the way that just further adds fuel to the affordability crisis and doesn't fix it. Like even now, people just love Trump, love what he's doing. But what is he doing? Last year, job numbers just came out. Last year was a disaster. The whole time Joe Biden, and I've got some issues with Joe Biden, Barack Obama before that, and Trump before, I've got issues with all of them. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at a graph with Biden, I'm not sure if I have one. I won't pull it up right now. I'm not prepared for it here right now. If you look at the jobs growth under Trump, it's abysmal. Pretty much parallels what was going on from 2016 to, when the coronavirus became an issue. When Trump tried to hide it under the carpet, he knew in December of the year prior, China, Xi Jinping made him aware of what was really going on, but Trump chose not to do anything about it. Then the new year came and he said, well, it's just going to go away. And before you know it, sunlight will cure all our problems. But created a situation where he had to go to the Treasury, got checks made out with his name on it, which caused a real inflation boondoggle going forward. But everybody blames the inflation crisis on Biden. Inflation was an issue around the world because of the pandemic. Worldwide pandemic that decimated supply chains and business, and that's what created the inflation problem. Mind you, most people don't understand how inflation works. They think if government prints money, that creates inflation. Well, that is the furthest from the truth. If government and Treasury does not put money into circulation into the system, it will not help prop up the system. So there's a contradiction in terms here, and this is where people don't get it. But how do you get the right balance? The other factor at play is, well, maybe if you have price controls with energy, rent, and food, in those three sectors, that really eliminate a lot of the affordability problem worldwide. And you got to understand, when the EU was put together, some of those countries, sovereign countries, became one under the EU, but they abandoned their own currency, which was a mistake, because each country could be able to print their own money and not be bound by the whole EU blanket. So nobody has spent the time to revisit the EU structure and construct and reformat it in a way that serves the Union, the EU Union, much more than it does at present based on the constructs in place, and really helps with the situation moving forward. Now you've got a guy like Donald Trump that brings in tariffs. He's abusing everybody in tariffs. And say a country like Canada, why do you not have a deal? Trade deal, Kuzma. The thing is, even the UK got a trade deal. Like, these trade deals are a little flaky the way these ones are done. But nobody's telling you that. But even though the UK had a trade deal with the US, as soon as they stand up for Greenland and Denmark, trade deals mean nothing. New tariffs are going to be placed on the EU countries and anybody that supported what went against Trump's way of thinking. So in Canada, if Canada sticks up for itself and it actually explains the reality of what the issue is with the current system at the World Economic Forum, Trump gets his knickers in a bind. Now he's going to seize bridges. Just spent billions creating these bridges, but he's going to seize the bridge. Why is he going to seize the bridge? Because there's an old bridge that was owned by an American family that actually made a lot of money off of the use of that bridge for many, many decades. And they petitioned Trump. So you really have to understand that Trump has been the most corrupt American president and will go down in history as the most corrupt president in the history of the United States. Let's listen to a little bit more of Stephen here.
After this event, whether Trump wins the next election or not, to bring about a reform system that doesn't have the flaws that Carney has identified so well in the dishonest foundations of the international system, because, as he said, the whole idea that it was a rule-based system was specious because the rules were applied selectively. There was a dominant party in the whole thing called the United States of America. All this stuff has now been exposed and shown as failing. We have one person who we can thank for the situation we're currently in, and as it happens, it's not Donald Trump. It's this guy, Harry Dexter White. Now, if you're wondering who the hell Harry Dexter White is, he was the chief member of the American delegation to Bretton Woods, which is where the post-war financial architecture was designed. And he was a bureaucrat inside the American government, but in the circumstances of World War II at the end, he was the dominant member of that delegation.
But here's the other thing. At that point in time, the Americans did not have the trade deficits. A guy like Keynes, he offered an alternative for trade, which was the Bancorp system, which I mentioned in my video that got 11 views 4 months ago. Now, further to that, we also have an issue where politicians and people that are highly regarded and looked up to, which, is another issue, that people give their authority away to these people. And you see it on YouTube all the time. You've got influencers that don't know what the hell they're talking about. And then you got people with credibility because they went to school, got educated, they're a lawyer, they got economic degrees. And guess what? They also don't know what the hell they're talking about. But you buy into it. Right through the left and right frontal lobes into the upper cortex, and it gets programmed into your subconscious and unconscious mind. So you keep putting these people back into power like the Conservatives in Canada, and they keep trying to fit a large square peg into a small round hole. That's their fix for the system, and nobody gets it. Their economic system and policies created the problem. And it's not just them, others over the decades as well. So let's be straight up here. But now that you know the system needs to be changed, not flip-flopping back to what didn't work and try to keep applying, that's not going to work. Population's up to 8 billion around the world. Not going to work anymore. That way of looking at things is over. But also the way of looking at things has created a situation where the average Joe, people that make up, that are the foundation of all sovereign nations, have been suppressed and oppressed, and the middle class has been wiped out and pushed down into the oppressed and suppressed class, and they're paying the way for the people that are in the top 10% and for the people in the top 1%. And there's no need for that. And you have a situation, and this is where the Epstein files have really brought this to the forefront, where guys like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Donald Trump, Epstein, Lex Wexner, or whatever his name, Les Wexner, many, many others. And Putin's in there as well. So there's a cadre of many that have been manipulating the system, manipulating people around the world. And I got to tell you, this imperialistic capitalist way of doing things has been refined by the Russians under Putin. And he's refined it very well and taken that model. And he and Trump have worked it throughout the United States. And that's where you have about 39% of the U.S. population. Statistically, at least 26% of the population in the U.S. is illiterate. They're just blocked from getting into the education system and educate themselves. But that's a double-edged sword, too, because, and where it's created an issue is the Ivy League schools have taken bribes to get people of influence degrees. And there you have ignorance with a degree, so people give their authority to people with degrees, give away their authority. But that person really has no basis of understanding what's going on. Trump's a perfect example of that. The guy's illiterate. If you looked at any of the Epstein, not looked at, but listened to the actual recordings, he would have stated, because I heard the recordings, Epstein said Donald Trump cannot read a balance sheet. A billionaire can't read a balance sheet? Exactly, he can't. Very basic, simple, foundational tool for any businessman. Epstein also said, they were best friends, Epstein also said, Trump does not understand cause and effect. He's a functional illiterate, does not understand cause and effect, and on that basis, you got to worry about how that guy is going to act and react. And this is what Epstein was worried about. Now, the other question you need to ask is why Epstein, that really shows, or did not show, if you look at the interview he did with Bannon after he got out of incarceration the first time. Bannon's another friggin' piece of work. But there's no, based on the way that Epstein thinks, there's no way that's a guy that would commit suicide. That's just not part of his makeup. So there's many questions here. And now you have the cover-up, this Pam Bondi being grilled by the Congress. Whoa, look at her pushback. Is that a person that's working for the people? I don't think so. So we got 39% of the population of the United States that are into might is right and want to conquer the world, that are oppressing the rest of the United States of America. And the U.S. has a lot of brilliant, wonderful people, but they get caught up into trying to figure out this guy, five-dimensional chess, so that's just the way he is. Just friggin' utter bullshit. This guy, Trump, has lived a lifestyle of ostentatiousness. That's why he's been always on the verge of bankruptcy throughout his whole life. That's why he's been a criminal. I was married into a British blue blood family that goes back to the East India Company. And if you understand how the East India Company operated, then you'd understand what's happened here. Because my father-in-law helped Yeltsin. This is why he had the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and the Pandora Papers. This is why he had these oligarchs with all these friggin' super yachts. A lot of them paperwork registered through the Guernsey Islands. Guy was a brilliant lawyer. But he was a criminal. Simple as that. And might is right. That philosophy. Not an issue until you get caught. So take what you can while you can. This is the way some people thought. And this is the way we do not need to live. Because everybody can live in a life of harmony and abundance. No reason for people to suffer. This is what you got to figure out. I got these two videos. I'll play just a bit more. See, mine's 10:45 ending. Let's read a bit.
Once these two economic superpowers agreed on how to handle money, most nations lined up behind them. That turned monetary chaos to order for the first time in world history. From 1871 to 1914, the International Gold Standard, as it was called, had an enormously positive effect on world trade, as described by economist John Maynard Keynes.
The inhabitant of London could order by telephone, sipping his morning tea in bed, the various products of the whole earth, in such quantity as he might see fit, and reasonably expect their early delivery upon his doorstep. He regarded this state of affairs as normal, certain, and permanent.
But it didn't last. The August guns of World War I fatally wounded the gold standard and shattered international unity. The chaos spread by the Great War sowed the seeds for an even deadlier conflict to come. This time, world leaders knew they had no choice but to come together and build the foundation for a lasting peace. Out of the ashes of World War II,
we're going to switch.
Delegation. And there were two
before we do here, let's listen to the end here.
A new monetary system was born.
Okay, and this is how we got to Bretton Woods. Now, America had the factories, America had the weapons, and they acquired a lot of gold, 2/3 of the world's gold reserves, in order to help finance the war. And here's the thing. FDR is haggling over. He can't get Congress, he can't get the American people involved in the war. So it takes the Japanese to friggin' nearly wipe out all their ships in Hawaii. Brilliant move by the Japanese, but probably the worst mistake the Japanese ever did. But nonetheless, history has some interesting quirks and turns. So the fact of the matter is,
proposals on the table
listen to this.
at Bretton Woods. One was for the system we actually ended up with, which was Harry Dexter White's proposal, and that would replace the British pound with the American dollar for international trade and link the American dollar to gold, so that if you tendered 1 ounce of gold to the American Treasury, they had to give you $35, and vice versa. With $35, you could buy 1 ounce.
And you have people to this day, well, it's because we don't tie the dollar to gold anymore that we got the problems we've got. So it's amazing how many human beings create all these constructs to justify pain and suffering for themselves and for others, and for this make-believe system that we cannot get rid of the pain and suffering because it's not necessary for anybody, because we're in a situation now where a dollar is more precious than a human being's life. Like, how do you get that? How do you actually rationalize that? How much does it cost to print a $5 bill, $10 bill, $20 bill, or a $100 bill? Pretty much the same for each. And in volume, the price exponentially goes down. So get rid of that thought. So the system around the world needs to change, but you got to get rid of politicians like a guy like Trump, who brings back what happened in the late 1800s, early 1920s, as a method of living, which brutal period, very brutal period. A few benefited greatly, and a lot suffered greatly. So if you think it's all about money, you really need to give your head a shake, because it's the construct of money and the way it's used in the past, which has created the problem in the present. And if you change the construct and the way money's used in the present, you can change everything going forward. So it's a very simple process. You can continue this pain and suffering so that only a few benefit, or you can create a system that lifts up the bottom. And you got to admit, when you build a house, if you got a good foundation, which is the bottom up, you're going to have a good house. So that same metaphor applies to the human experience. So questions, comments, throw in chat. Love and peace to y'all. Take care. Talk to you soon. Ciao.